Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a special episode of War Veterans, the History of Our Heroes. My name is Jonathan Krawchuk with Culpeper Media Network, filling in for Anita Sherman today. We have the pleasure of speaking with Lieutenant Colonel Hans Heinz. Lieutenant Colonel, thank you very much for coming in. It is a pleasure to talk with you.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Now, what we're doing is we want to go through and learn a lot about you, and especially a lot about your service. Okay. And you have an extremely interesting story about your youth. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, Heinz is not necessarily an American name. That's from overseas.
That's correct.
So
yes.
do me a favor, tell us where you were born, tell us a little about your family and how you came to America.
Okay. Well, I was born in 1938. Mm-hmm. So that makes me 78 years old.
78 years young.
Okay. In a little town called Bački Jarek, which is in those days was Yugoslavia. Today is Serbia. And this is an area that was settled back in the late 1700s by ethnic Germans coming from Germany, obviously, into the Austro-Hungarian Empire because they needed settlers in there to work the ground. So this town maintained its German ethnic speech and also the customs and so forth throughout the 200 years until I was born. Mm-hmm. And so, as I said, I was born in 1938, then the Second World War came along. All of the men in this little town of about 2,000 people went into the German service because they were ethnic Germans. In 1944, the communists the Russians, I should say, broke through the German lines in Hungary and invaded Yugoslavia. We all fled as refugees, but there were only the old men, the women, and the children. And my part of the family, we settled in a refugee camp just south of Munich in Germany. When the war ended in 1945, we could not go back to our hometown because it was then cut by the communists. In fact, it had been raised by the communists. That's a whole other story. At any rate, my mother's family had relatives over here in the United States. So we were sponsored at that time as displaced persons, and we could come to the United States if we had a place to stay and a guaranteed job. So that's what we did. My grandfather, that is my mother's father, came over first. Then my mother and I came over because my mother spoke English, after which my grandmother and uncles and so forth. And eventually the men who were in the service were then discharged from prisoner of war camps, and they came over. And we settled in St. Louis, and this was in 1948. So I was more or less grown up in St. Louis as a typical American kid, played the sports, did all these kind of things, and then I guess it was 1960 or so forth, that's when I got my draft, not really a draft notice, but notified that I was going to be getting my draft notice. So then I enlisted in the Marine Corps Reserve.
So when you came upon draft age, what were you doing then? Were you going to?
I was going to college. I was, I think, in my second year in college. So.
Okay. And what were you studying in college?
Wildlife biology.
Really?
I was going to be a forest ranger / game warden, whatever. This was before ecology became the buzzword. So yeah.
A little bit of a different path you took.
Yes.
All right. So you were drafted. Tell us about.
No, I wasn't drafted. I
enlisted.
I'm sorry. I enlisted. Mm-hmm.
So you enlisted
in the Marine Corps Reserve, right?
So why did you choose the?
Well, because they had a program whereby if I finished college, they would send me to OCS. So I spent 2 years as a reservist, as a typical rifleman, and then when I graduated from college in 1962, I went to OCS at Quantico, Virginia.
And OCS is?
Officer Candidate School.
Ah, okay.
And so then I was commissioned second lieutenant in the Marine Corps.
So you're now in Quantico, Virginia.
I'm now in Quantico, Virginia in 1962.
Okay. And talk to us about some of the training there.
Well, every Marine officer goes through what they call the basic school. This is where in those days, now it's changed a little bit, but everybody went through the basic school, which is basically an infantry school, six months long, mm-hmm. and we learned the basics of marine life and so forth like that. And then after you graduated from that school, you went to your specialty, being aviation, tanks, artillery, intelligence, what have you. I went into infantry, so I graduated there. I guess it was in June of '63, and I did what not to say normal thing people do, but some people do. I went home and got married. went back to St. Louis and got married. And then my wife and I went to my first duty station, which was in Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, with the 2nd Marine Division.
Well, before we continue on with your military career,
Sure.
Tell me a little bit about you and your wife. Where did you meet, and tell us about that.
Oh gosh, it was a marriage made in heaven. How shall I say it? We both went to high school together. She was a year behind me. I was captain of the football team. She was captain of the cheerleaders. I went off to college. She followed me to college. So we dated high school, college, and for a year afterwards, while I was in the service, without being married. So
you came all the way back to St. Louis to marry her.
That's right. And we made our honeymoon, which is kind of funny. We did our honeymoon in Branson, Missouri, which today is an elaborate. In those days, was nothing but a bunch of cabins on a lake with people fishing. So it was a hideaway place. Now when people, I say I had a honeymoon in Branson, they say, wow, that was really, I never saw a show or never.
It is definitely a very different these days.
Yes, it is. I haven't been back since either.
All right, so after your training, you come back to St. Louis and you get married.
Right.
And your wife's name again?
Her name was Elizabeth, but she went by Betty.
Okay.
Betty Heinz. She was a science teacher at the middle school while I was at the high school. I don't know if you recall that, but
I do not recall that.
okay.
That's you guys went to high school, college, and then you taught together.
Yeah, isn't that something?
That is pretty incredible.
Yeah.
All right, so getting back, you come back and you marry Betty, and then you are then stationed in Camp Lejeune.
Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and what is this, 64?
This was 63 to 65.
Okay, and what were your duties over at Camp Lejeune?
Well, I started off as an infantry rifle platoon commander. Then I was XO of the rifle company, and as a weapons platoon commander. So I spent two years in the 1st Battalion, 8th Marines. So.
All right, so you're currently in the 1st Battalion.
8th Marines.
8th Marines.
8th Marine Regiment. Yeah, right.
Okay. So when I'm assuming you went from Camp Lejeune over to Vietnam then?
No, I went from Camp Lejeune to the Naval Academy to teach at the Naval Academy. So I taught at the Naval Academy about 2.5 years. I taught German, and because I spoke German, which is, the Marine Corps actually had slots to fill there to keep people. So I was a German instructor at the Naval Academy. And that's like having you go somewhere and say, okay, you speak English, you're going to teach English at University of Virginia or something like that. So that was an interesting tour.
So how long did you teach there?
About 2.5, 65, and I left in November of 67. I got there in June of 65 to November of 67, so a little over 2 years.
Now we'll cover some of your additional teaching in the future, but is this where you pretty much got the first teaching bug?
Right. Yes.
All right. So take us through now. You're now a teacher.
Right.
And we fast forward to, I believe you said 67.
1967. November 67.
And then after that.
Then I went to Vietnam.
So tell us how that came about.
Well, it was everybody in those days went. You were either in Vietnam, going to Vietnam, or coming from Vietnam. So you didn't have much choice in the matter. All enlistments were frozen. You couldn't resign your commission or anything like that. You were committed till the end of the war, I guess.
So you tell us about when you went over there and what you were doing.
Well, I got there, as I said, right after Thanksgiving of 1967, and I had a military occupational specialty called MOS. I had a secondary MOS intelligence, which only reason I had intelligence was because I spoke German. I could be the interpreter. But my primary MOS, my job, was infantry. So I wanted to go to infantry. I said, no, you're going to go to the G2, which is the intelligence portion of the 3rd MAF, Third MAF, which is Marine Amphibious Force. We have always had a problem in the Marine Corps, depending on who the President of the United States is, because we used to be called Marine Expeditionary Force, but expeditionary sounded too warlike. So the powers that be at that time changed it to amphibious. That didn't sound like it was war. Now we're back to MEF. Okay. Anyway, I was an intelligence briefer. What happens, I would brief the commanding general every morning on things that came in over the night and so forth like that. And then the Tet Offensive came around in 1968. It was January 68. and a lot of the Marine infantry units took heavy casualties. So they were asking for volunteers to go to the infantry, so I volunteered to go to the infantry. And so I left my plush job at the Marine Amphibious Force headquarters, which was with maids and shine boots and tea service in the afternoon, a really plush job, and I went out there and became a grunt.
So now explain to me, obviously the Tet Offensive was I wouldn't say a turning point, but an important.
Well, it was in a sense that, number one, we won the battle but lost the war because of all the publicity back here. Mm-hmm. Primary of which, and I still blame to this day, is Walter Cronkite, who came in with, the war is lost, woe is me, and all this kind of stuff. And I would write my mother and say, and my wife say, we're winning the war. And but Walter Cronkite said, no, you're not. He's got such beautiful blue eyes, and we just got to believe him. So, anyway, yeah.
As an aside, that's the second time that we've heard a mention of Walter Cronkite in some of
right?
these. Yes, absolutely.
Well, just don't mention Jane Fonda. That really gets me on.
Well, we don't want to get too carried away here. So, explain to me. Take me back to that time after the Tet Offensive. You mentioned you volunteered. I'm sure there were a number of individuals in your area that also volunteered. Mm-hmm. Explain to me your mindset when after the Tet Offensive and volunteering. Obviously, I'm sure, for lack of a better term, you were really gung ho to help out.
It was that way because number one, at that time I was more or less a career Marine. I had gotten a regular commission rather than a reserve commission, so I was committed for a career. And it was, if you would be a if you were a Marine with combat experience, you'd have a better chance of getting promoted than if you were a Marine without combat experience. So, the mindset was I got to get out there and show my mettle and do all this kind of stuff. So that was it.
So when you volunteered after the Tet Offensive,
mm-hmm.
What was your current rank?
I was a captain.
Okay.
At that time, yeah.
All right. So you were a captain heading in. So you are now officially a grunt.
Yes.
Talk to us about where you started during.
Well, I joined the 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines, and they had been really hit hard because they were one of the units in the battle for Hue City. I don't know if you remember, that shows up all the time. Battle of Hue City. They took tremendous casualties in Hue City, steep fighting and all this kind of good stuff. So I joined them, and basically we operated. I became a company commander, infantry company commander, and we operated in an area of Tuatin province, which is north of Da Nang, between Hue and a mountain range called Hai Van, which is an area where the main north-south road of Vietnam went through this highway pass, snaked up the mountain and down again. And so we operated there for a number of months, and then we were moved from there south because they were getting some problems south of Da Nang with the 2nd North Vietnamese Army Division coming in there and rocketing the base and so forth like that. So
now you mentioned the battle for Hue City, where you went into the 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines?
5th Marines. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so after the battle of Hue City, after you came in to basically shore up their numbers, mm-hmm.
You
mentioned moving around. Were there any other battles or
nothing of any consequence? There was nothing that would get mentioned. Ambushes here, basically patrolling here and there, keeping forces up. Just little slip-slide stuff. So.
Okay. Now we've done a few of these interviews,
okay.
And I have a couple family members who served in Vietnam,
mm-hmm.
and I've heard a little bit about their day-to-day life and what they did periodically, as they were going through the jungle. Can you take us a little bit about what your day-to-day life was with the 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines?
Well, the thing is, someone once asked me what is combat like, and I say it's like being the soccer goalie. Soccer game, 90 minutes long. A soccer goalie has 89 minutes of pure boredom interspersed with 1 minute of stark terror, and that's what it is. So basically, day-to-day stuff. They're patrolling. We went into villages and so forth, and pacifying and spreading the good cheer.
So when you're talking about all this downtime, what did you and your buddies do?
Well, you trained. Actually, believe it or not, even though you're in a combat situation, you train patrolling and so forth like that. You cleaning weapons, just being basic, sitting around doing a lot of nothing. But then it got more interesting after been there a couple of months in that job north of High Van Pass. We had gotten a order to move, and let me tell you, this is kind of an interesting story because we had gotten order to move, and so the battalion commander. We were spread out. At that time, a Marine infantry battalion had 4 companies, and we were spread out over a 20-mile period. A company every 5 miles or so. And so we got ordered that we're going to move out, and the chaplain was going to come around to have services. So I don't know what religion you are or anything like that, John, but so the chaplain was a Catholic priest. And he came around and he said, Heinz, I said, Father, I've got all of the Protestants standing watch, and you're all the Catholics are over here for service. And he says, okay, I want you to come and read for me. I said, well, Father, I'm a Lutheran. I don't feel it. He said, no, you owe it to yourself too. Okay, Father, I'll read, but I'm not in this. Anyway, he had the service and so forth. I finished everything up, and he said, Hans, you know, Lutherans, when the wine is consecrated, it becomes the blood of Christ. But after the service, you can put it back on the shelf and use it next week. As a Catholic, we believe in transubstantiation. That means once the wine is blessed, it becomes the blood of Christ, and it must be consumed that day or poured out. I said, I didn't know that, Father. He said, yes. Just so happens I consecrated this gallon of wine, and it behooves us to get away with it. So that was my chaplain story. Incidentally, he is no longer. When he came back from Vietnam, he resigned or whatever. He left the ministry, should I say? Okay. So.
I'm sure there were a few people who were happy that you pulled that jug out.
Yeah.
So you're making your way back south.
We're making our way back south to a place called An Hoa, which is about 30 miles southwest of Da Nang.
That's one march.
Yeah. And there was a kind of an outpost there with about 100 Marines, a fire base. There was a German hospital off to the side, and they had been getting some mortar rounds fired at them. And so they flew us down there in helicopters, and they had briefed me. My company and another company, I was an Echo company was my company, and Foxtrot company was the other company. So we flew in there late in the afternoon, just as it was getting dark, and we started getting some mortar rounds shot at us, but nothing really serious. And the next day, I was the senior company commander, so I was in charge. We broke up and went to various patrols to see if we could find these mortars. So 2 days later, we were out there. One of my platoons made contact, and so I also had 3 tanks with me. So I got one of the platoons on the tanks, and we went out there to reinforce this company or this platoon. And as we were maneuvering up there, an Air Force forward air controller flying around in one of these little Piper Cub type planes came on our radio and said, I see about 6 or 8 running into a tree line about 200-300 meters up ahead. Now this was an area that was flat, abandoned rice paddies and so forth like that. And it was what they called a free fire zone, and anybody in there was presumed to be hostile. So okay, so he said, I'll mark them with smoke. So he shot some rockets in there and shot a smoke. And we got up to about 100 meters from them. There was a long open field between us and that. And so I said, okay, we'll take one platoon will stay here. One squad of the platoon will stay here, and the other 2 maneuver for the right. We'll shoot down and send the Chanks in there, and we'll blast them out of it. Well, we got about halfway across that open field, and then all hell broke loose. Both tanks got hit with RPGs and so forth through a tread. The platoon who had assaulted across there was in the tree line and said, he came back and said, I'm in tree line. I said, pull back. He said, I can't pull back. I've got too many dead. And then the Marine thing was, you never leave your dead behind and so forth. So anyway, we were lucky that the FAC, the forward air controller, was there and immediately had some Marine air phantoms on station. And he said, I'll get them to make a dummy run. And he made a dummy run, and while they're making a dummy run at about 50 meters high, they were able to pull back, and then we were just surrounded at that time. As it turned out, my company had, at that time I had about 120 in the company. We had run into a whole battalion of North Vietnamese, of the 2nd North Vietnamese Division, that was screening the whole division coming in to make an attack on Da Nang. So we were boxed in there, and their flawless firing going, and then I got wounded in the abdomen, and I guess I just lost it all. I just couldn't. By the time I came to, I was lying in an area the corpsman had put aside where all the dead and wounded were in there, and we were trying to get helicopters to come pick us up, and they wouldn't come in because it was a hot zone. We were still under fire, and after about 4 hours, I finally were able to break the ambush, and because my other company was coming to reinforce us, and so I was able to get out of there, medevaced out of there. So
that's incredible.
Well, that's what happened. That
so,
was the only other action that I could tell. You're talking about action before.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I mean, I can only imagine the confusion and just sheer. I would be scared.
Yeah.
I would add a few more adjectives to that, but just so when your company came up, you were an Echo company, but when your battalion came up, and you
Foxtrot,
said,
the other company, they were coming up. The rest of the battalion was still about 30, 40 miles away up in Da Nang, trying to get down there.
So you guys ran up against, you said, the battalion of the North Vietnamese Army.
This is what it turned out later on when everything was analyzed. Yeah.
And so how many soldiers are we talking about here?
Well, I went in with 120, and it turned out with 33 killed and about 70 wounded, of my company. Mm-hmm. And then the next day, when we were reinforced, I had been medevaced. The Vietnamese didn't leave their dead either, if they could. So I think they policed up the bodies count, from everything else, something about 2. And that was the big thing in those, is body count, which of course means nothing. But about 2, they found almost 200 dead North Vietnamese where they had left, because the rest of the battalion was coming in. By that time, we were trying to isolate them.
So you said, actually, a couple follow-up questions I want to ask you about. So you said that you were hit in the abdomen.
Right. Mm-hmm.
I guess first we'll start with that. I'm assuming from rifle shot?
Yeah, as it turned out, it was probably a ricochet, because we wore our flak jackets, we called them in those days. Now it's body armor. Mm-hmm. And it went underneath it, because we didn't have flak pants or anything. It went underneath it, and as it turned out, hit my liver and intestines and so forth, split up in their intestines. So. That was the extent of those injuries, and then when I got on the helicopter, they had stripped everybody of the clothing, and so they ripped it off when they're treating it. The corpsman did, and somehow the helicopter had a .50 caliber machine gun. The crew chief was shooting it, and the brass from the thing was landing on me. Which had burned the hell out of my abdomen. I had all these burns on me. So
adding a little insult to injury.
Yeah.
So you said when you were injured, you were approximately there for, you said, about 4 hours?
We were in there. We made contact about noon and didn't get out of there until about 4. I didn't get out of it until about 4 hours later. Yeah, until about 4.
So it was Echo Company and
Foxtrot was coming.
Oh, okay. They were on the.
They were coming, but their company commander was a guy named Tom Martin, and he was talking to me on the radio, and then they were coming on amphibian tractors, what we call Amtraks, and his was hit by an RPG, and he got blown off the tractor and broke his leg, so he was injured. But he's at the custody. I'm on there, but the XO is bringing him out there, so.
Well, I think it's pretty amazing that you guys run up against a large force and
with no intelligence. Yeah, we had no intelligence that they were there. I guess we were the initial people that found them. So.
Yeah, and then you guys held them off for that long until you.
Well, we made contact. Let's put it that way, and we knew where they were.
Yeah.
So that everything like that.
So you mentioned something when the FAC, was it?
Forward Air Controller. Mm-hmm.
He marked them with smoke for the Phantoms to come in and do a dummy run. I'm assuming that a dummy run is when they come in hot.
Really, because the normal procedure in those days was they they came in strafing, or they came in, then they dropped what they call snake-eye bombs, which are retarded bombs. They drop the bomb, but it has a fin on it which slows it down. Because the airplane is so low, if the bomb goes off right away, it would hurt the airplane, but it stops the bomb. And then the last thing would be napalm on there. So that was, we call them napes, snakes and napes. That was the thing. But they made a dummy run first. And it's kind of scary because the Phantom is a loud aircraft, and there's no noise abatement in those. They're just huge, screaming thing. And it's a huge jet. It's not a smaller jet, so.
Well, I guess in that instance, that was a pretty welcome sound to hear.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. Yeah.
So you're currently, fast forward to, well, not the present time, obviously, but you were injured, and you mentioned you were being airlifted out in the helicopter.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And getting pelted with brass from a 50 caliber machine gun. So I'm assuming you went to a Ford hospital? Yeah,
I went to, they were, depending on, who, what. I was evacuated to the Naval Hospital in Da Nang, which was, by the time I got there, I was really kind of in and out of it. And then I went into shock. And, that was the first time even since the Boy Scout days, you were always saying, treat for shock. You raise the legs, you put the blankets on them and do all this kind of stuff. And I figured out, because you're just shaking everything. And then they put these triage tags on you. In triage, they search you whether there's no hope, forget it, this guy can wait and this guy needs immediate treatment. And they're color-coded. And they had taught us this in the basic school in Quantico, but I couldn't remember what color was what when they put this on me. So, and anyway, I went into shock and I couldn't remember. And the next thing I remember is waking up in this room. It was all white, lit up, and all these people were in white uniforms. And I said, my God, you made it to heaven. All the angels are around you. You've said my prayers every day and did all this kind of stuff. Well, as it turned out, it was the Navy nurses. The Navy was not like you see on MASH on television. They were Quonset huts. They wore their white uniforms and so forth. And so I was in there, and my gosh, I'm alive or something, when I finally realized it. And then all of us, I don't know, it must have been a couple hours later, you hear this kaboom, kaboom. The Naval Hospital was across the road from MAG 26, or MAG 16, which is the Marine helicopter base. And they were the North Vietnamese or Viet Cong, I don't know which was what. They were sending mortar rounds and rockets, but some of them were falling short and hitting in the complex. So these Navy nurses were running around putting flak jackets over us because we were all this was the intensive care unit. You get 47 different things hanging out of you, and they put the blankets on, these flak jackets on there. So and that brings me another story, which is kind of interesting, because in the subsequent, after I got back to the States and did all this kind of, I was assigned to recruiting duty in Dallas, Texas. We were in a commercial office building. And we Marines, we were on the 6th floor. The Navy recruiters were on the 7th floor. And the Army was on the 8th floor. And so we got along pretty well with the recruiters. And the Navy, head of the Navy recruiting said, hey, our nurse recruiter, Louise Gray, who I've met a couple times, she's getting a Bronze Star. Come on up. We are getting a celebration together. And so, okay, I went up there. We all, and they did the formal ceremony, attention to order, on that Lieutenant Commander Louise Gray did on such and such a date. Distinguished herself anyway, she got a Bronze Star because she was in charge of the unit in which I was in and throwing all the things. I said, Louise, you were there, but comparing, isn't it a small world?
That's incredible.
Incredible, right there. And I had the honor about 6 months later to pull my saber and cross it when she got married. That's small world. I saw it. Yeah.
So and so you went to that ceremony, and where was that again? The office building?
Dallas.
Where? Dallas, Texas.
Dallas, Texas.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty remarkable.
It is. It's just, as I said, it's a small world.
It truly is.
Yeah.
So heading back, what was her name again?
Louise Gray. She was an Indian from a reservation out of just north of Albuquerque, New Mexico, which was my territory as well. So we used to go up there and travel because the Marine Corps has no nurses. So I used to, women, you'd come up and say, I wanted to be a Marine nurse. I was like, we don't have, but go see Louise Gray. She'll fix you right up.
So Louise Gray at this time is putting flak jackets on all the intensive care units, and the mortar shells are falling short.
Well, they're all over,
Yeah.
yeah, spread it.
And so, obviously, she probably saved a few lives that day.
I don't know about that, but it was one of the, she was kind of interesting, though. But
So-
I didn't know her at the time, obviously.
So how long were you laid up?
Well, I was in intensive care about 10 days, and then they transferred me to the Naval Hospital in Yokosuka, Japan. So we flew over, they medevaced me to Yokosuka, Japan, and I was in the hospital there about 35 days, I think.
You had some pretty serious injuries.
Well, I also caught pneumonia while I was there and so forth. So at that time, it came time they said, well, we're not going to keep you. We're going to medevac you back to the States for outpatient treatment. So from there, they flew me back to Annapolis, because that's where I'd been stationed, and my wife was still living in Annapolis at the time. And the Naval Hospital was active at the time in Annapolis. So they transferred me to the Naval Hospital in Annapolis. So I was in there as an outpatient probably 30, 40 days. And then from there, they sent me to Quantico to go to school, to the amphibious warfare school, to learn how to fight a battle. So, so that was a 6-month school.
My goodness.
And from there, I went to Dallas as a recruiter.
All right, so I want to back up a little bit. Can you tell me the extent of your injuries from that ricochet, you believe it was?
Well, the ricochet came up, and it broke up. The round broke up. So that because, in fact, they're still in me. I just had an interesting discussion about 3 or 4 weeks ago, because they're going to do this surgery on me. As I told you, I got this kind of thing, and they wouldn't give me an MRI because of the plus the stitches they had stitched me up with and so on. And so it was an argument between the radiologist who says no and my doctor who said yes, and so then they finally decided we're going to give you an MRI because we think all of the shrapnel and the pieces of bullet and it's all encased and they won't have any problems. And so.
Oh my goodness.
And anyway, yeah. So it had 4 penetration, 4 intestines, and the liver, a lobe of my liver was shot off. And the big danger with an injury in the abdomen is a thing called peritonitis, where all of this stuff in your intestines would go out and infect the brain. And so, luckily, I didn't get peritonitis, and I really am grateful to the corpsman because I was so thirsty when I was wounded. Give me some water. No, we're not going to give you water. It's going to spread this stuff around. Give me some water, God darn it, give me some water. And luckily he didn't give me any water because I was dehydrated so badly. So.
Those field medics know their stuff.
They sure do, corpsmen. I mean, they're number one. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for them.
So you're now back in Annapolis, finally outpatient for, I think you said, what, 30, 35?
35, 40 days,
35
something like
days?
that, yeah.
And that's where you were stationed at. So coming back, and then you said, so after you get out of the hospital in Annapolis, what's then? You're done.
I went to Quantico. I got transferred to Quantico. I think it was in January of, 69, end of January 69. And I started amphibious warfare school. That's about 200 Marine captains and various other services going through this what do you call lower level staff college. So that's normally it's a year long, but they shorten it for 6 months during the Vietnam War. So I was there for 6 months, and then from there I went to Dallas, Texas to be a recruiter, officer recruiting. I went from college campus to college campus recruiting for the officer program. Yeah.
So again, getting back to working with, well, kind of in a sense teaching again, working with younger folks. So how long? How long were you in Dallas doing that?
I was in Dallas 3 years. Okay. I did that in Dallas for 3 years, and I traveled. My territory was North and West Texas and all of New Mexico. So I did a lot of what we call windshield time, driving from college campus to college campus. Had 87 schools that I went to.
87
colleges and junior colleges, yeah.
So
and the commandant, and then at that time, there was a lot of demonstrations on college campuses against the war, and a lot of people didn't want to go to that. I'm not going to go to that school because there's none. And the commandant of the Marine Corps said, no, you will go to every school. You put in your time. I don't care what they do and what to do. You will not be kicked off that campus. And I'm saying, I'm driving 600 miles for nothing and spending all this gas. You will go. Well, I didn't talk to the commandant myself, but that was the gist of the argument. Is we're wasting our time here, but he made us go. So
Orders are orders.
orders are orders.
Interesting, because at this time you're still a captain.
I was still a captain.
Okay, so you're going from college to college, and you mentioned something that has come up again a number of times, is the backlash against the war. What was it like as a recruiter, going from college to college, and basically, I'm sure you were you got a few times. Why should I enlist after you're coming back from Vietnam?
Yeah. Well, the thing, I was fortunate in that it was West Texas and New Mexico, for the large part, were very patriotic areas. You didn't see a lot of things like you saw in the eastern schools and the western state schools. So I had a couple demonstrations against me and so forth like that, but for the most part, it was not too bad. I was able to talk, and a lot of cowboy. We call them the cowboy schools out there. And guys coming to school with their cowboy hats and the pickup truck, wearing big belt buckles and boots and so forth like that. It still had a patriotism back there. The Okie from Muskogee type guy. So
it's a good song.
Yeah.
Did you, when you were doing recruiting, and you were in the military for quite a long time, and military life for a long time, did you ever reconnect with some of those individuals that you recruited?
Yeah, as a matter of fact. I'll tell you another interesting story. It was later on in my career, but it was a recruiting thing. After one of my last duty stations before retiring was I was head of officer recruiting for the Marine Corps in Washington, D.C. And one day I'm in there by myself. The secretary had gone out to lunch, and this young man came in dressed up in a suit and tie, and he said, I said, "Can I help you?" And he said, "Yeah, I'm looking for this guy named Heinz." And I said, "Well, that's me. What can I do for you?" He said, "You sent me this letter saying that I'm not best qualified for the Marine Corps, and I want you to tell me why." And I said, "Where are you from?" He said, "I drove all the way up here from Houston, Texas." He said, "You're kidding me. You drove all the way up here from Houston, Texas to find out?" And it was one of these things where, you're looking at things, and this guy had a higher grade point average, this guy had a higher, no. I said, "You're kidding me. You came all the way up here?" I said, "That shows me it's kind of initiative. We've got a class starting in another 2 months. How about you going for that?" He said, "Yes, I will." Okay. So we enlisted him in that class. And then after I retired, one of these days, I went back up to headquarters Marine Corps to see my secretary to take her to lunch. And I walk in, and there's this guy sitting there. He said, you don't remember me, do you?" I said, "I don't know." He said, "I'm so-and-so. You're the guy that told me I couldn't get into the Marine Corps, and now I've got your job." I said, again, you talk about a small world we're talking about. So
it's another great story.
Yeah, I couldn't believe it, yeah. But yes, I did run in a couple, 3 others. But again, in those days, you lose touch after a while, and I don't see too many of them now anymore. So.
Well, I can imagine how many kids when you were recruited by you, but still to come back with a couple stories and meet a few of them, that must have been nice. Yeah, we had quotas, so many per month, and with probably six to 8 people per month over 3 years. That's that's a pretty good number. So that's a few people.
Yeah. So.
All right, so at this time, you're a recruiter down in Dallas, Texas, and this is early 70s you're still doing
this? Was, from 69 to 72.
72, okay. So after you were a recruiter, where did you move after that?
And then I was sent overseas to Okinawa, Japan. And the war was drawing to a close. The Marines had already been out of there for a couple of years anyway. So I was over there with the 3rd Marine Division on Okinawa, and I was in charge. I had since been promoted to major by then, and I was in charge of the shooting ranges for the 3rd Marine Division. The rifle ranges and the artillery ranges and tank ranges, and my job was to coordinate all the shooting and so forth like that. So I did that for a year.
Okay. And actually, I want to backtrack just a little bit. One of the things I didn't ask you about is where were you when I mean, the airlift out of Saigon when the war ended. Where were you, and how did you hear about it?
Well, when the war ended, I was stationed. I left Okinawa, and I was next duty station was Hawaii. I was in Hawaii when the war ended there.
So tell us about the reception of when you heard and where you were.
Well, I was in Camp Smith in Hawaii, and then the war was over. I'd been flying the prisoners of war out of Hanoi, and so we saw quite a few on television. That was what it. And we had been more or less in Hawaii, which was the headquarters of the Marine Corps Pacific Command. We had inklings of we may have to go back, we may have to go back, we may have to go back, and they were going through our record books to see what we're doing. None of us wanted to go back, but and then the war ended was a big relief. Everybody was happy.
So what was the general consensus with when you were at Camp Smith? Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm sure there were maybe a few soldiers that were not big proponents of the war, mm-hmm. and then obviously there are plenty who were gung ho for it. But what was the general atmosphere when you guys heard?
Well, most of us were happy type thing. Yeah. The thing we had in those days, I don't know if any of your other interviewees had mentioned this or not. We had a Secretary of Defense called McNamara, and he was going to save the world by everybody in the United States that couldn't make it, we would put him into the military. He would put 100,000 people in it, called Project $100,000, of the lowest mental group in the United States, because the military was going to square them away. In those days, I don't know if it's still that way the same, but you had 4 mental. When everybody went into the service, took what they call the Armed Forces Qualification Test, AFQT, which is kind of a how shall I say it, measure your IQ type thing. We call it the GCT, General Qualification Test. GCT. Anyway, you could score 1, 2, 3, and 4. The smartest being 1, when the upper 90th percentile, all the way down to the 4, which was the lowest 30% or something like that. And he demanded, when it was still going on recruiting, that the armed forces must put 100,000 of those lower. And it was a complete disaster, because when you train to the one of the lowest level. You can do all you want to, but until that guy learns, everyone else. So that was a zoo. So we had a lot of people at that time when I was in Hawaii, even in Okinawa before I went to Hawaii, who were these low mental groups, and you really couldn't train them too well, but they were in there because McNamara forced them to be in. So.
Well, some ideas just not the best.
You can talk what you want to about politicians.
So here we are. We're in Camp Smith in
Hawaii.
And we're mid-70s now?
This was 73 to 76.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And what were your duties there?
I was a company commander. I was a company commander of what they called service company. Camp Smith was the headquarters of the Marine Corps FMF PAC, called Fleet Marine Forces Pacific, and also the headquarters of the Pacific Command, the overall commander of everybody in the Pacific, which has always been a Navy admiral's post. So the camp supported all of the headquarters, and I was in charge of all of the people who provided service. I was in charge of the cooks, the bakers, the MPs, the special services guy, not special forces, special services. They issued out, athletic gear and so forth like that, horses, MPs, you name it. And I kept the record books and provided punishment if need be or anything like that. So.
You made the base run.
Well, it was one of those things that But it had a lot of, provided the honor guard. There was a lot of honor guards because people came through. Every general officer that came through had to have honor, so had a saluting battery, a band, and all that kind of stuff. So.
Well, it can't be too bad. It looks like you're doing managerial stuff over in Hawaii.
In Hawaii, yeah.
Doesn't sound like too bad of
a
station.
Could have been worse.
Yeah, most certainly could have. And so this takes us. You were there. You said 72 to 76. Okay. And so after that, 1976, you're still in the service, and at this time you are still a major.
I'm still a major.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So where'd you go to after 1976?
After that, I went to Newport, Rhode Island, to the Naval War College as a student. So I was there a year for that.
studying?
Well, I got a master's in naval tactics, if that means anything to you.
My goodness.
That's a marketable skill, I'll tell you that. You never know when you're going to run into a submarine, you know.
And so why did you choose that?
Well, that was just, they didn't choose it. They sent you to,
Okay.
they sent you to. The Marine Corps sends a lot of, all the services, they send people to all of the various staff services schools. So it just so happened there was a quota, I guess, and I was available, so there I went. I think there are about 200 students in my class, of which about 30 of us were Marines. So my 10 Army and 10 Air Force and 1 or 2 Coast Guards, and the rest were Navy. So.
All right, so now you have your master's.
Yeah.
And so after going to War College, where'd you go after that?
After that, I went to Headquarters Marine Corps and became the head of officer recruiting. Well, I shouldn't say. For 1 year, I was assistant attaché to the Chief of Naval Operations. That was the head Navy guy. He has 4 Marines on there. And what we did, his office was in the Pentagon. Marine Corps headquarters was on top of the hill called Henderson Hall, or Navy Annex in those days. And we would run messages back and forth, and so between the Commandant of the Marine Corps and the Chief of Naval Operations. It was a non-true thing. I'd sit around and, just hang around, do all kind of stuff. And I tell you another interesting story that happened there.
Yeah.
Because there were only not that many Marines in the Pentagon itself, but we knew all the officers there. And one of which I was a friend of mine. He was in charge of the Secretary of the Navy's office. He was in there in the Secretary of the Navy's office. I used to go back and forth, have coffee with him. One day I walk in, and he's there, and there was this Japanese admiral sitting in there. And I walked right in. I said, "Oh, something's wrong here." And he introduced me to Admiral so-and-so, who spoke English. And so it was kind of an embarrassing, and he kind of said, aside, the Secretary of the Navy had some kind of a conflict, and we're trying to entertain this guy. Okay. So I'm talking to the Japanese admiral. I said, "Admiral, I noticed you have wings on there. Were you a pilot?" He said, "Yes, I was a pilot." I said, "Oh, what did you fly?" And he said, "Well," kind of chuckling, he said, "I was a kamikaze pilot in World War II." And then he says, "Perhaps I should elaborate on that." He said, "I was trained to be a kamikaze pilot. I was a young ensign and ready to go. And the next day was our mission, but a airstrike created all the runways, and we couldn't get off the ground, so we had to wait for the runways to get fixed." So 2 days later, a hurricane, a typhoon blew in, and just ruined all this kind of stuff. He said, and then the war ended. He said, and I am there.
Wow.
So I said, oh, yeah.
And there he was, an admiral.
There he was, an admiral. He was the chief of naval operations for the head admiral of Japan. Yeah, the chief. Yeah.
Another interesting story.
Yeah.
So here you are in the heart of it all in D.C. In the late 70s. How long did you serve there?
I served 1 year at the Pentagon, and then I went down back to the Marine Corps and became head of officer recruiting for the Marine Corps, and that was for 3 years.
This was in D.C.?
This was in D.C. This was up the hill from where I was.
Henderson Hall.
Henderson Hall. Well, Navy Annex. Mm-hmm.
All right, so then we're looking into the early 80s. Are you still serving, and what did you do after that?
And then they sent me down to Quantico to be the amphibious warfare school, which I was a captain, went there. They sent me down there as an instructor for amphibious warfare school. So I was an instructor for a year, and I was head of academics for a year, and I was the XO of the place for a year. And this brought me to 1984, in which I retired at Quantico.
So here we are. That's 1984, you said. Mm-hmm. That's about 20 years of service?
Well, I went enlisted in 1960, so...
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm. 24 years.
Wow, that's impressive.
2 years in the reserve and 22 years active.
So you retired as a lieutenant colonel?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. My goodness. That is a long and storied career.
Well, that was not atypical. It was just, other people do a lot of other different things, a lot more exciting things, but I put in my time. Well,
and you have some great stories to share because of it. And going back and looking through your military career, a lot of it had to do, and as we move forward towards your life after the service, it had a lot to do with students and the young and education, whether receiving one or giving one. Is that when you retired in '84, What did you do after that?
Came right here to Culpeper.
Good decision.
Well, it was one of those things. I was going to retire, and I was looking for a job, and it just so happens that someone mentioned that there's a Marine Corps Junior ROTC unit that needs an instructor down there. So I got on the phone and called Bill Pearson. I don't know if you remember Mr. Pearson. I called him down there, and I said, I'm interested in a job. He says, come on down there and talk. We'll set up some interviews. So they interviewed me, and I retired the 30 June of 1984 and took the job at Culpeper 1st of July 1984. And they also needed a soccer coach because they wanted to put us. So I was a soccer coach. I had been certified under the FIFA Soccer Society, so I became the soccer coach as well.
So I have a couple follow-up questions based upon your education and experience here in Culpeper. But I want to look back at your overall feelings toward your military service. 24 years, a career Marine. Mm-hmm. You went all over the world, from Okinawa all the way back to Hawaii. Well, if you go the other way, it's a long distance, but it's really short.
I served a lot in the Mediterranean, too, and my first tour of duty when I was in the 2nd Marine Division, floating around in the Mediterranean with an infantry battalion. So.
Oh, really? We didn't really delve into that.
Yeah, and I was also in '65. I was still down there when I don't know if you remember. You probably don't know about this, but there was a revolution in the Dominican Republic in 1965, and we sent Marines down there to restore order and so forth like that. So that was the first time I was in kind of shot at and shot back type thing in '65. So.
Well, interesting. We didn't get to talk about that. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Well, I was with the 2nd Marine Division in Camp Lejeune. I was executive officer, 2nd in command of a rifle company, and I guess it was in April. It was in April of '65. A revolution broke out in the Dominican Republic, where the rebels took over the capital, and I think the United States was really qualms about communist takeover after the experience with Castro and so forth. So I was in the alert battalion, the scramble the alert battalion. We went down there and landed in San Ysidro Air Force, and another Marine amphibious unit came. Again, it was amphibious in those days. It was not expeditionary like it is today. Landed from the sea, and then we tied. And then the 82nd Airborne came in from Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and so we all kind of come and held the rebels for about 60 days and so forth like that till everything blew over. But we had to straighten out the lines and did all this stuff. So.
And so you were on the ground at this time?
Yeah, I was on the ground at this time. Yeah. That was the first time that anyone ever shot at me, and I shot back at them. So.
What was that like? First time at this, because in '65 you were.
I was a lieutenant.
You're a lieutenant, and you're probably, 65 to 30?
I was about 24.
24 years old.
Yeah.
It's got to be a pretty intimidating moment for a 24-year-old.
Well, I don't know about that. You do your job, you're trained to do, so it was one of those things.
Yeah. All right, so again, fast forward, you, looking back, you retired in '84, but here you come in July 1. And start teaching at Culpeper.
Right.
And you taught at Culpeper and coached soccer for a number of years.
Till 2000. I taught ROTC till 2001. I stopped coaching soccer. I think it was in the mid '90s, I was refereeing after that because I could choose my schools and schedule better. That was.
Throw a few red cards here and there.
I don't know.
So looking back at your military service, how do you think it helped you, or did it, when it came into the teaching world?
Well, number one, I think the school liked it because I maintained discipline in the classroom, and also we did a lot of training. What did they call? I'm trying to think of the name of the school used to do it, but where the senior cadets taught the younger cadets. So, in other words, peer training and so forth like that. Instill that, and the most part of it was that when they had ROTC, if you recall back in your school days, once a week we wore uniforms, or the cadets wore uniforms. I wore a uniform every day. There was less trouble in the hallways because cadets didn't fight because they didn't want to get their uniforms messed up. So that was a one day when you didn't have the typical fist fight in the hallway. So
Yeah, I do remember. In fact, that's where we first met. I was not in ROTC myself, but everybody knew the ROTC was the real deal because you were a serious man. I do remember that. Lieutenant Colonel Heinz was a serious man.
Well, the thing is, you treat everybody the same. You know, that's the thing. And what I found is, and that is not to criticize teachers, but the teachers have a tendency to have their pets and so forth, and they treat certain students better than other students because they're nicer in class. With me, it was everything. You got to do everything the same, and I never forget. And I shall remain nameless. Our leading cadet, who it was a cadet lieutenant colonel. He was in charge of the unit. One day, his English teacher came to me and said, "I caught so and so cheating." And I said, "You really?" He said, "Yeah." "Can you handle it?" I said, "Okay. You want me to handle it, or you want it?" "No, I wish you'd handle it." So I called the boy in and I said, "Is this true?" He said, "Yes, I did." Because we had this honor code time. A cadet does not lie, cheat, or steal. "Did you do it?" "Yes, sir, I did." "Why did you do it?" "Well, we always it was kind of. I think the teacher knew we were pressing all this kind of good stuff. This was her bad day, and she just caught me." I said, "Well, I'm sorry, but you're no longer the senior cadet. You are down as a cadet private." Busted him. Well, 2 days later, the teacher came in and said, "Did you bust so and so?" I said, "Yeah." They said, "Why did you do that?" I said, "Well, you told me to handle it." He said, "Well, I didn't want you to do that." I said, "I'm sorry." But the good deal about that is this young man got a scholarship to VMI, became a Marine pilot, ran into him, I guess it was about 5 or 6 years ago. He was one of 4 Marine pilots at Quantico who flew Marine One. He flew the president around. And he got me and the lady I'm dating, I don't know if I'm a widower, but the lady I'm dating now, "Would you like to come up and see?" Yeah, so we got us in there. We got to sit in the helicopter and did all this kind of good stuff.
It's quite a date.
He is. So anyway,
now going back, I asked you earlier about when you were a recruiter in Texas, and I can only imagine the amazing stories just like that one for all the students that have come through your doors throughout your 16. I'm horrible at math. But a long and storied career as a teacher at Culpeper.
17 years.
17 years. Wow. And you mentioned that's just one student who went on to fly Marine One.
I'll tell you another one, but I'm not going to. I went in to have a colonoscopy one day, and the prep nurse was one of my former students, a male who had gone into the Navy, become a corpsman, got out, went to nursing school, got his, and I said, "Gosh, I hope I gave you a good grade."
Very, very good point. All right, well, Lieutenant Colonel Heinz, first off, just a couple more questions that, looking back, when you look back at your entire career of service in the military, how does it make you feel? I mean, it seems like as a career Marine, I would hope, it seems as though it was an invaluable experience throughout the years. But when you look back, how do you remember your service?
That's hard to say. I didn't go in with the intention of becoming a career person. I just went in. I want to put my 2-3 years in and then get out and be a force ranger or something like that. But then it just got to be a point where I enjoyed doing what I do. I enjoy being with the troops. I enjoy, the camaraderie and the chain of command and so forth. I said, well, this is kind of a nice life. I would do it over again at a minute's notice. I enjoyed it. I get along well with people, and from a monetary point of view, it really became great because you don't realize it when we went in those days, but the medical and dental benefits are really great, especially as we get older. Especially when my wife had cancer and had to go through all this treatment before she passed away. So I say nowadays to the young men, don't look at the salary, look at the benefits. So from that point of view, monetary point of view. But yeah, I enjoyed it very much, and I really get to teaching at high school here. I run into I think half the policemen in this town, sheriff's deputies and so forth, are all my former students, and they always come back and say, thank you for what you did for me. So that was it. I don't want to blow my horn, but I think I was good getting along with students and motivating them. So.
Well, not only have you helped make a difference in our country, but you've certainly helped make a difference in our community, specifically, teaching ROTC and shaping the youth into the adults they've become today.
Yeah. Thank you. It's nice to hear.
So now looking back, again, one more question before we head out here, because seriously, I could sit here and talk with you for hours regarding your even more into your service and more into your teaching, but we are a little bit limited on time. Well, when you look back and you see these students who have grown up, and police officers, you mentioned a number of them, but what would you say to the even younger crowd of today regarding military service? I would say, obviously, as an ROTC instructor, that you would extol the virtues of military service.
I sure do. I'm a firm believer in that everybody in this country owes this country something, and I'm a firm believer in that every person should do some kind of service in the government, either Peace Corps or health, so forth, or military service and so forth. And I don't think you can get wrong in the military. I used to say, the one thing the military teaches you to do is something to make you do a job that you may not want to do, but yet you were going to do it. And that's a secret to success in life. Find out what the boss wants and do it, and then you'll do it. So that's my whole thing, is everybody ought to go into some type of service for a couple of years.
Well, again, Lieutenant Colonel Heinz, I cannot thank you enough for your time today, your service not only to our country, but also our community. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Appreciate it. Again, thank you for tuning in to another episode of War Veterans, The History of Our Heroes with Lieutenant Colonel Heinz. I've been Jonathan Krawczyk, filling in for Anita Sherman from the Culpeper Times, who we formed a partnership with for this program. Again, if you or someone you know is a veteran and wants to share their story with the community and indeed the world, make sure you give us a call here at the station at 540-825-2447, or you can email us at info@culpepermedia.org. Again, thank you for tuning in for another episode of War Veterans, The History of Our Heroes.